Whales are magnificent creatures, capable of holding their breath for over an hour and diving to over 1,000 feet deep. But where did they come from? Scientists who support evolution suggest whales evolved from a land mammal. For them, the fossil evidence is so convincing, the evolution of whales is offered as one of the best fossil proofs for the theory of evolution. However, scientists who oppose evolution argue that this fossil evidence is unreliable. Darwin thought that whales might have evolved from bears. In The Origin of Species, he wrote, "In North America, the black bear was seen swimming for hours with widely open mouth, thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered, by natural selection, more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale." Modern evolution scientists have abandoned Darwin's idea of a bear evolving into a whale. Scientists at the University of Michigan suggest whales evolved from this cat-like animal because of the similarities in the teeth, while scientists at the California Academy of Sciences believe this hyena-like animal evolved into a whale because its teeth are similar to some extinct whales. Biologists in Japan suggest whales evolved from a hippopotamus-like animal based on similarities in the DNA. Detractors of the theory ask, if whale evolution is so clear, and if the fossil record is so abundant, why can't evolution scientists agree upon which land mammal changed into a whale? There is great excitement in the scientific community over the discovery of a few important missing links between a land mammal and modern whales.
But what's good about these particular fossil whale specimens is that they do show us intermediates in the evolution of whales. And we don't often get fossil intermediates, so we can actually trace the development of characters. Say, for example, the evolution of swimming in whales. We don't often have that opportunity.
They have a big exhibit on it in Michigan. I was just there. They have all these things just sitting out there. I mean, they're all there. I mean, you really have to be blind or 3 days dead not to see the transition among these. You have to not want to see it.
As shown in this diagram from the University of Michigan Natural History Museum, Ambulocetus is one of the important transitional fossils in whale evolution. It is thought by some to be a walking whale.
Just in the last 5 or 10 years, we've had some remarkable discoveries of fossil whales. And in fact, there have been discoveries that have indicated that fossil whales had feet and actually walked on the land.
Frankly, I don't know why they could call that creature a whale. I have never seen a walking whale, and I've never seen a pig that flies. And they suggested some of these creatures were intermediate. Frankly, I just don't believe it. They believe that because they want to believe it.
Recently, some evolution scientists have backed off the assertion that Ambulocetus was an ancestor of modern whales because its eyes are high up on the head, like an alligator's eyes, quite dissimilar from whales and land mammals.
Ambulocetus may be on a slight sideline, and we think that mostly because it's very strange. It has its eyes raised up on top of its head in a very strange way, and it's unusually large for an early whale, but mostly the eyes up on the top of the head seems like an unusual specialization. Maybe it's not on the main line.
Evolution scientists claim the most spectacular intermediate fossil in whale evolution is Rhodocetus, an animal with 4 legs, a whale's tail called a fluke, and flippers. It would swim using its widened tail fluke like a modern whale, but it had 4 legs like a land mammal. A perfect transitional fossil between land mammals and aquatic mammals, just as Darwin predicted.
The fossil whale that appears a little bit later is Rhodocetus, and this animal had large tail vertebrae that indicate there were lots of room for muscle attachment. So here we see the beginning of the type of locomotion that's characteristic of the modern whale, using just the tail flukes for propulsion and not using the hind limbs.
We have a complete modern whale-type structure in Rhodocetus. There are not many modifications from Rhodocetus to the modern whale other than changes in size of the structures.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rhodocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rhodocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocetus based on the other pieces of anatomy? Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocetus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rhodocetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rhodocetus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies. Opponents of evolution contend that whale evolution is nothing more than hopeful supposition. If museum diagrams are redrawn and corrected for various discrepancies, opponents argue that whale evolution is non-existent. Birds are a diverse group of vertebrates. Most are able to defy gravity and fly. Some are able to swim underwater, while others are incapable of flying or swimming. Evolution scientists believe birds evolved from dinosaurs. They refer to the oldest known fossil bird, Archaeopteryx, as a missing link because of its unique mix of both bird and dinosaur-like features.
Archaeopteryx is a classical example of a connecting links between two high systematic categories, namely the classes of birds and reptiles. Its skeleton is still dinosaur-like, whereas it had already fully developed feathers as the extant birds, and obviously it was capable of powered flight. The existence of such connecting links, that means intermediate stages between large groups of organisms, is a conclusion of Darwin's theory of evolution. And the discovery of the first specimens of Archaeopteryx met the expectations of the Darwinians and had an enormous impact on the scientific community.
Opponents of evolution believe Archaeopteryx was simply a bird. Many museum models portray Archaeopteryx with a scaly dinosaur-like head. Dr. Peter Wellmhofer, one of the world's experts on the evolution of birds, believes these museum models are wrong because scales were not found on the fossils. He contends that Archaeopteryx had a feathered head.
So we can reconstruct a model of Archaeopteryx based on the dimensions of the skeleton and based on the extent of the wing, of the feathers, of the wing and tail. We don't have a record of the body covering of the head, for example. So reconstructions are in most or in large parts are hypothetical and speculative. What is not known is the covering of the head, whether it was scaly. It doesn't mean that the lack of feather imprints means that there were no feathers. It's well possible that finer feathers and short and more delicate feathers just were not preserved as fossils, as imprints. They were too soft, too tiny. And how far the feathers reached around the skull, we just don't know. Whether it was scaly like a lizard, we don't know, but I personally, I'm very suspicious that that was true. But as I said, this is all speculation.
Many models of Archaeopteryx highlight the wing claws, which are thought to be similar to claws on the arms of dinosaurs. Opponents of evolution argue that claws on the wings are not necessarily a dinosaur feature. Bats have wing claws, but bats are mammals and unrelated to dinosaurs. Also, many modern birds have claws on their wings.
But we have also other birds, a lot of birds, which display claws as nest legs. This is not so rare. This is amazing. Yeah? I think most people don't know this.
No birds living today have teeth, but Archaeopteryx did. This leads some scientists to think this animal descended from meat-eating dinosaurs. Scientists who disagree with evolution point out that teeth are present in all vertebrate groups, not just dinosaurs. Also, the teeth of Archaeopteryx do not have serrations like their theoretical ancestors, the theropod dinosaurs.
Tyrannosaurus rex, the teeth are serrated like a steak knife, front and back, and that was really for ripping flesh. Whereas in Archaeopteryx, the teeth are pretty smooth on either edge, and if they have any serrations at all, they're very, very, very faint serrations.
Birds today have a very short tail called a pygostyle, yet the tail of Archaeopteryx is relatively long, which some believe to be another dinosaur trait. Opponents argue similarities such as the length of tail cannot be used as evidence for evolution, since many animals have long tails. Some museum models show Archaeopteryx in a dinosaur-like pose, using its wing claws to catch its prey. However, if the bones of Archaeopteryx are reassembled in a bird-like position, its skeleton takes on the appearance of a modern bird. And if the speculative scales are replaced with feathers, Archaeopteryx looks no more unique than other birds. Although scientists who support evolution believe Archaeopteryx evolved from a dinosaur, they have not found the fossils to prove this.
So we don't know exactly the dinosaurs from which the birds evolved. But there are so many features of birds which are dinosaur-like that most paleontologists think that they descend from these dinosaurs.
Opponents of evolution suggest that Archaeopteryx is a specialized bird, and without bird ancestors, the theory is essentially speculation. Some evolution scientists theorize that feathered dinosaurs existed in the past. In support of this belief, museums have added feathers to many common dinosaur models, such as this velociraptor exhibited at the Museum of Victoria in Australia. Opponents of evolution and even some evolution scientists have criticized this practice, since no feathers have been found with any dinosaur fossil. In an open letter to the National Geographic Society, Dr. Sture Olsen, a Smithsonian Institute evolution scientist, has referred to the practice of adding feathers to dinosaurs as propaganda, hype, wishful thinking, melodramatic, nonsense, spurious, fantasia, and a hoax. He wrote, "The idea of feathered dinosaurs and the theropod origin of birds is being actively promulgated by a cadre of zealous scientists acting in concert with certain editors at Nature and National Geographic, who themselves have become outspoken and highly biased proselytizers of the faith. Truth and careful scientific weighing of evidence have been among the first casualties in their program, which is now fast becoming one of the grander scientific hoaxes of our age. This practice may not be the only scientific impropriety in the bird evolution evidence list. In the mid-1990s, a whole series of fossils with feathers were found in the Liaoning province of China. According to evolution scientists, the discovery of unique feathered fossils supports bird evolution. But reliability problems have emerged for these fossils. Dr. Timothy Rowe is a paleontologist who supports evolution and runs the University of Texas CAT scan laboratory. Dr. Rowe had the unique opportunity to closely examine a Chinese fossil called Confuciusornis, which to the naked eye appeared to be a solitary fossil.
I believe we scanned this in 1997. It was just shortly after the bonanza of Liaoning had hit the news in a big way. I'd never handled any of these specimens before. And this was brought to me, and I thought this was how it came out of the ground. And I thought, wow, what an awesome specimen. It's complete and massive and it's easy to handle. And only by scanning it did I learn, in fact, how it had been repaired.
But after scanning the fossil, Dr. Rowe began to question its authenticity.
And when I handled it, it was very well built. It felt like a single massive piece of rock. And only by looking at it in cross-section could I see that it was built in 3 layers, 2 of which were natural, and the intervening layer was made by humans. And so this really started me thinking, well, there's a little more here than meets the eye.
Grout and metal chips lay hidden inside the fossil, which became obvious when subjected to the scrutiny of the CAT scan. The fossil had been carefully painted to hide alterations.
But once we scanned it, we could see the grout layer. And so when we see steel objects in these things, we know that it's got to be made by humans.
Upon further evaluation, Dr. Rowe found a piece of the jaw had been substituted with a bone from another animal.
Well, I have no idea what animal this piece came from. It's just a very small fragment of bone, and it was probably chipped out to fit this space. So I have no idea where this extraneous piece came from. There are some other odd pieces around the edges too that don't fit on this.
This first encounter with a Chinese specimen would not be Dr. Rowe's last. A second Chinese fossil was brought to him by a scientist from National Geographic magazine. This fossil, called Archaeoraptor, was purported to be an unusual missing link which would, once and for all, prove that birds evolved from dinosaurs. It had a long featherless tail, similar to dinosaurs, but it also had feathers and a bird-like body, giving the appearance of 2 different animals blended together, just as Darwin predicted. As Dr. Rowe carefully scanned the Chinese specimen and watched the cross-sectional images appear on the computer screen, he noticed something was very wrong. Dr. Rowe discovered that 26 fossil bones from 5 animals, including a dinosaur and a bird, had been fraudulently constructed to make a transitional fossil.
And that was the thing that caught our attention first. We could find no verifiable fit between the tail, the most spectacular part of the specimen. We could find no verifiable fit between that piece and any of the other parts of the block. And we found other irregularities as well. Even though it seems to fit tightly in here, when you look at it in cross-section, you can see that this piece and this piece have no verifiable association with the pieces around them. The next thing happened were the 2 shin bones were glued in. And likewise, these have no verifiable associations. The next thing that happened is that the foot was glued on, and I say foot rather than feet because this is a single foot. This is a slab and counter slab that were split and separated and glued in place to make it look as though there were right and left feet there. It's a clever use of materials. You know, if you're limited, you take a single foot and turn it into 2, you know? Very, very creative.
This schematic diagram shows how many different fossils and rocks were used to create Archaeoraptor. Each color represents a different type of rock and a different type of animal. Dr. Rowe reported his startling discoveries to the National Geographic scientist. Yet soon afterwards, the unexpected happened. National Geographic held a press conference announcing the discovery of Archaeoraptor, failing to disclose the fossil as a fraud.
And we provided the data and our interpretation to the representatives of Geographic. And the scientist in charge, as he walked out of the building, his last comment to me was, well, all of these Chinese things have been fiddled with. But he understood that there were profound questions surrounding this, and we'd been brought in as consultants simply to scan the specimen, and which we did. We presented our interpretation, original copies of the data to all parties, and it was a total shock when the news conference came that they were announcing that this was a valid specimen.
3 months after the original CAT scan was performed, National Geographic published its story about the discovery of Archaeoraptor. The article claimed that Archaeoraptor was a flying dinosaur, a missing link, and the best evidence that birds evolved from dinosaurs, but failed to reveal the serious discrepancies found by Dr. Rowe. Those who oppose evolution suggest that if evolution scientists have to add scales to the heads of birds, add feathers to dinosaurs when neither have been found, or resort to creating fraudulent fossils as evidence for evolution, then there must be no proof. Scientists who support evolution acknowledge that individual scientists have made mistakes, but these are corrected over time. This is how science works. Many are still convinced birds evolved from dinosaurs.